This is some big news that's coming out right now. It looks like Microsoft.
Microsoft believed the $68.7 billion Activision acquisition would become the move that finally won the console war.
But this does appear to be a big win for Bobby Kotick.
By acquiring the world's largest publisher, home to Call of Duty, World of Warcraft and Candy Crush, Xbox wasn't simply buying games. Microsoft was attempting to own the very franchises players refused to leave behind. It wasn't buying content, it was buying attention. Valued at more than Nintendo's entire market cap and worth over half of Sony's total valuation, the $68.7 billion deal became the largest acquisition in gaming history. Microsoft wasn't trying to compete anymore. It was attempting to become impossible to compete against. 2 years after Microsoft's biggest victory, Xbox found itself dismantling the very strategy it had spent decades building. Winning the acquisition wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of Xbox's biggest strategic contradiction. This is the Activision Paradox, and how Microsoft's greatest strategic victory forced Xbox to dismantle the very moat it spent billions trying to build. When Microsoft acquired Activision, it wasn't simply buying another game publisher. It was attempting to build one of the deepest competitive moats the gaming industry had ever seen. Overnight, Microsoft gained ownership of Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Candy Crush, Diablo, and dozens of other franchises played by hundreds of millions of people. These weren't ordinary video games, they were attention engines, businesses capable of generating billions of dollars year after year from audiences that rarely leave. Call of Duty had become one of the most successful entertainment franchises ever created. Candy Crush quietly dominated mobile gaming, but Activision wasn't an isolated purchase. It was the final piece of a much larger strategy that had been unfolding for nearly a decade. Microsoft had quietly been assembling an empire long before anyone realized what the endgame looked like. First came Mojang and Minecraft, then Bethesda through ZeniMax. Finally came Activision Blizzard. Individually, each acquisition strengthened Xbox. Together, they were designed to make leaving Microsoft's ecosystem economically irrational. The objective wasn't simply to own more studios. It was to turn Game Pass into the Netflix of gaming. Every blockbuster added to the subscription made canceling feel more expensive for the customer. Microsoft repeatedly described Game Pass as the future of Xbox.
First-party games that you can buy our game once, you're going to get play across Xbox and Windows. I think we're the only platform that does this. That makes it possible for you not only to play with your friends wherever they are.
On paper, the strategy appeared almost impossible to beat, but every moat depends on one critical assumption, that the walls can actually keep competitors out. But before Microsoft could enjoy the benefits of its new empire, it had to clear one final obstacle: regulators. Ironically, the biggest threat to Xbox's strategy wasn't Sony. It was the governments deciding whether the deal could happen at all. Regulators feared Microsoft could use Activision's franchises to weaken competition by making them exclusive to Xbox.
Game maker Activision Blizzard. In a statement Wednesday, Britain's Competition and Markets Authority said, "We've prevented Microsoft from purchasing Activision over concerns the deal could damage."
Call of Duty had become one of the world's largest gaming franchises, reaching hundreds of millions of players across Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. Losing a franchise like that could change which console millions of gamers chose to buy next. To secure approval, Microsoft agreed to unprecedented commitments ensuring Call of Duty remained available beyond Xbox. Many assumed Activision would become Xbox's greatest exclusive weapon. Instead, Microsoft had effectively promised regulators it wouldn't use that weapon the way investors expected. Microsoft's own executives repeatedly emphasized that Call of Duty would remain available across platforms after the acquisition.
All kind of going to play out.
Yeah, so we're not taking Call of Duty from PlayStation. I know that, which isn't exactly what you asked, but just like punch that one in the nose.
Yes.
That's not our intent. Our intent is not to do that.
The acquisition dramatically expanded Xbox's content library, but it failed to strengthen the one advantage every console ecosystem depends on: exclusivity. PlayStation and Steam, therefore, experienced almost no immediate disruption from Microsoft's historic acquisition. Players could continue buying Activision's biggest games exactly where they always had. Microsoft's moat had grown wider, but not taller. It owned more castles, yet competitors could still walk through the front gate. Xbox would benefit from future exclusives, developed by its growing collection of studios. But game development moves slowly. Building blockbuster games isn't measured in months, it's measured in years. Microsoft had paid the bill today, while the benefits remained somewhere in the future. But there was another problem investors rarely discuss after mega acquisitions. Buying a company isn't the expensive part. Owning it is. Overnight, Microsoft inherited thousands of additional employees, dozens of live service games, global publishing operations, esports leagues, customer support, marketing teams, and development pipelines spread across multiple continents. Investors often imagine acquisitions as buying assets. In reality, Microsoft had also purchased one of the largest monthly payrolls in the gaming industry. Activision's own financial filings showed billions of dollars in annual operating expenses long before the acquisition closed. AEA game development had also become dramatically more expensive. Modern blockbuster titles increasingly required hundreds of developers working for years. Every delay, every cancelled project, every disappointing launch now carried a much larger financial consequence. Industry analysts increasingly described AAA development as one of the fastest growing cost centers in entertainment.
There is real estate costs, and office space is certainly a factor, but the biggest expense in game development is people. The reason for that is that on a game, you need to pay salaries of people.
The Activision acquisition didn't simply increase Xbox's revenue, it increased its financial obligations even faster. Revenue is exciting, costs are permanent. That's where many acquisitions quietly begin to fail. As Activision's financial results were consolidated into Microsoft's gaming business, Xbox revenue jumped significantly. From the outside, Xbox appeared larger than ever, but size and strength aren't the same thing. Sometimes becoming bigger simply means becoming harder to sustain. Inside Microsoft, attention increasingly shifted from expansion to efficiency. Wall Street wasn't asking whether Activision was a good acquisition anymore. It was asking when the acquisition would finally justify its price tag. To understand why Microsoft kept doubling down on acquisitions, we have to rewind nearly 20 years. The Activision deal didn't create Xbox's problems. It was Microsoft's solution to problems that had been building for over a decade. During the Xbox 360 generation, Microsoft wasn't chasing Sony. In some markets, it was leading. Xbox Live set the standard for online gaming, and blockbuster franchises like Halo and Gears of War helped define the console. Back then, Microsoft's moat wasn't Game Pass. It was hardware. If you wanted the best gaming experience, you bought an Xbox. Simple. Xbox 360 became one of Microsoft's most successful gaming platforms, selling tens of millions of consoles worldwide and fundamentally changing online gaming. But success created complacency. In 2013, Microsoft launched the Xbox One, and almost immediately, everything changed. Sometimes a competitive moat isn't destroyed by rivals. Sometimes the company tears it down itself.
Oh, nice. Gestures such as grab and pan and swipe up. Now, have you ever wanted to do more than one thing at a time when you're watching TV? Of course you have.
Microsoft's original vision emphasized television integration, mandatory Kinect functionality, and controversial digital rights policy.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
In less than 30 seconds, Sony reframed the entire console generation. Microsoft wasn't fighting a pricing problem anymore. It was fighting a trust problem.
All right, and the game award for Game of the Year goes to God of War.
Over the years that followed, PlayStation widened its lead with critically acclaimed exclusives like God of War, Spider-Man, and The Last of Us. Xbox gradually lost ground in both hardware sales and brand perception. Microsoft eventually accepted a difficult reality. Winning the next generation wouldn't come from building a better console alone. If Xbox couldn't win the hardware war, it would have to change the rules of the game entirely. That new battlefield had a name: Game Pass. In 2017, Microsoft unveiled a strategy unlike anything the console industry had seen before: Xbox Game Pass. It wasn't trying to sell you another console. It was trying to change how people paid for games altogether. For a monthly subscription, players could access a growing library of hundreds of games instead of purchasing each title individually. Microsoft had borrowed a playbook from Netflix and Spotify. Instead of asking customers to buy products, it wanted them paying every single month. Xbox executives openly described subscriptions as a critical part of the company's future. At first, Game Pass focused primarily on older games that had already completed most of their retail sales. That made the economics relatively safe. Microsoft could offer enormous value without sacrificing many full-price purchases. Then, Microsoft made a dramatic announcement. Every first-party Xbox game would launch on Game Pass the very same day it released. Overnight, Game Pass stopped being a rental service. It became an alternative to buying games altogether.
Explained, it's not the only thing that's growing in Xbox, it's not the only focus of the organisation, and it, as a standalone thing, is very sustainable as it sits today. It's sustainable. Spencer even addressed the thoughts that they are just burning cash, but reiterated that Game Pass is very, very sustainable right now and is actually still growing.
Microsoft's confidence wasn't based on short-term profits, it was based on scale. The company believed that once enough players joined Game Pass, raising prices would become far easier than convincing millions of people to buy individual games every year. For a while, the strategy appeared to be working. Subscriber numbers climbed rapidly, and Microsoft accelerated its investment in Game Pass. Success has a dangerous habit of reinforcing assumptions. Every new subscriber convinced Microsoft it was building the future of gaming. There was just one problem. The strategy that attracted millions of subscribers also threatened the economics that funded the games themselves. Every subscriber gained wasn't necessarily a new customer. Sometimes it was simply someone paying less for the same product. Traditionally, blockbuster games generated enormous revenue during their first weeks on sale, often selling for around $70 per copy. Launch week wasn't just another sales period, it was when publishers made the majority of their money. But once that same game launched inside Game Pass, Microsoft replaced thousands of $70 purchases with one monthly subscription. During the Activision acquisition process, Microsoft acknowledged in regulatory filings that Game Pass could reduce traditional game sales. Microsoft accepted that trade-off because it believed subscriber growth would eventually outweigh the lost retail revenue. The company wasn't optimizing for today's profits, it was betting on tomorrow's dominance.
The reason for why Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard was the revenue potential of Call of Duty. And they were hoping that by releasing Call of Duty on Game Pass on day one, it would cause a huge influx of subscribers, and that would offset the loss of sales and the fact that they're still selling that game in competing platforms.
Microsoft nevertheless released Call of Duty Black Ops 6 on Game Pass on launch day, making one of gaming's biggest franchises immediately available through the subscription. Subscriber sign-ups surged immediately after launch, but a successful launch and a sustainable business aren't always the same thing. Industry analysts questioned whether subscription revenue could ever justify blockbuster budgets that now exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars. Microsoft eventually raised Game Pass prices across multiple tiers. It wasn't simply charging more because demand was strong. It needed more revenue from every remaining subscriber to support the economics of the platform. Shortly afterward, reports suggested subscriber momentum weakened, forcing Microsoft to rethink parts of its subscription strategy. Microsoft had spent years trying to build an ecosystem that revolved around Game Pass, but by now, something inside the strategy had fundamentally changed. The objective was no longer maximizing subscribers, it was rebuilding profitability. For 2 decades, Xbox competed using the same objective as every other console maker: convince players to buy its hardware instead of someone else's. Everything Microsoft had built, from Halo to Game Pass, served that single goal. Exclusive games were the foundation of that strategy. They gave players a reason to enter and remain inside the Xbox ecosystem. Then, in early 2024, Microsoft announced that several Xbox exclusives would launch on rival platforms. At first, it looked like a small experiment. 4 games weren't enough to change the industry, but they changed something much more important: Microsoft's philosophy. Months later, Microsoft expanded the strategy. Indiana Jones, Doom, The Dark Ages, and additional first-party releases were confirmed for PlayStation. A decade earlier, these games would have existed to sell Xbox consoles. Now, they were being used to sell software. Regardless of where people played it, Microsoft still manufactures Xbox consoles. It still operates Game Pass. It still runs the Xbox Store. Yet its fastest-growing opportunity increasingly comes from selling games to people who may never own an Xbox. Microsoft's gaming leadership repeatedly described the company as one focused on reaching more players, rather than protecting a single device.
We look at our monthly active players, our daily active players, and when I say on Xbox there, whether you're playing on the cloud and
The Activision acquisition was supposed to strengthen Xbox's walls. Instead, it accelerated the moment Microsoft decided those walls were no longer worth defending. The company wasn't abandoning gaming, it was abandoning the traditional definition of a console business.
Community and our games and everything we have to offer on every screen we can. Games should be the thing that we're focused on.
Microsoft's new strategy solved one problem. It created new revenue by selling games on competing platforms, but it immediately created another. If Xbox games are everywhere, what exactly is the Xbox console for? Traditionally, console manufacturers accepted losses on hardware because software sales eventually recovered those costs. That model only works if software stays inside your ecosystem. Once your biggest franchises begin generating revenue on rival platforms, every console sold becomes less valuable to the business.
To Microsoft from our earliest of days, right? Our oldest currently supported software franchise is in fact a game, Flight Simulator, which we released 3.
Meanwhile, the economics of hardware were becoming more difficult. Component prices remained elevated, manufacturing costs increased, and console margins stayed thin. Xbox wasn't just competing against PlayStation anymore, it was competing against the cost of building consoles themselves. Microsoft executives have repeatedly acknowledged that console hardware generates relatively low margins compared to software and cloud services.
It was a record third quarter powered by the continued strength of Microsoft Cloud, which exceeded $54 billion in revenue, up 29% year over year.
Yet Microsoft continues investing in Xbox hardware, because abandoning hardware entirely would mean surrendering control of the living room and handing distribution to competitors like Sony, Valve, and Nintendo. Instead of abandoning hardware, Microsoft appears to be redefining it. Reports increasingly point toward an Xbox that functions more like an open gaming PC than a traditional closed. If that's the future, Xbox won't compete by locking players inside its ecosystem. It will compete by becoming the easiest place to access everyone else's. Ironically, Microsoft's next competitive advantage may come from becoming the least restrictive platform in gaming. Xbox may be retreating from the traditional console war, but that doesn't mean Microsoft is retreating from gaming. In many ways, it's making a much bigger bet, one that extends far beyond a single box beneath your television. Microsoft has already begun expanding beyond the console through Xbox Cloud Gaming, PC Game Pass, and partnerships across multiple devices. Instead of asking players to come to Xbox, Microsoft increasingly wants Xbox to come to the players. That's a completely different business. It's no longer about owning the hardware, it's about owning the relationship with the gamer.
See Xbox as a part of people's life in the next 10 years.
Our goal has been to put the gamer at the center of the Xbox world and allow gamers to make the decisions on who they want to play with and where they want to play.
Microsoft's partnership with Asus on the ROG Xbox Ally signals another important shift. The company is embracing devices beyond its own traditional console. What's interesting isn't the handheld itself, it's what it represents. Microsoft no longer needs every gaming device to be an Xbox, as long as every gaming device runs Xbox services. Company presentations increasingly emphasize cloud services, subscriptions, AI, and platform expansion as Microsoft's long-term growth engines. The Activision acquisition didn't produce the Xbox Microsoft originally imagined, but it may have accelerated Microsoft's transformation into something even larger, one of the world's biggest gaming publishers, platform providers, and entertainment ecosystems. Microsoft's leadership now speaks less about winning console generations and more about reaching more players across more platforms than ever before.
Some of the top shows in the world right now, they are games that turned into TV series or movies. And
Fallout number
I
one
think
on
that
Amazon.
Fallout's number two of all time. Minecraft was number 5 at the box office when it came out. So it just feels like the
Activision acquisition was supposed to complete Xbox's moat. Instead, it forced Microsoft to dismantle it. The company that once measured success by consoles sold is now measuring success by players reached. Whether that gamble succeeds remains to be seen, but one thing is already clear. The Xbox of the future won't be defined by the box beneath your television. The console war may be ending for Microsoft. The ecosystem war is only beginning.